Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Vimbai Mutinhiri Ekpeyong. Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Abati. Good morning,
Good
Ayo. Good
morning.
morning.
Good
Fine
morning.
last week of 2025.
Oh, yeah.
I'm feeling good. Are you guys expectant about 2026?
Yeah, we transition to 2026
Yes.
by God's grace. Looking forward to it.
New Year's resolutions written yet, or we don't believe in them? No?
New Year's resolution is tax.
That's your New Year's. That's not my New Year's resolution.
It's tax.
My New Year's resolution is that tax will not touch me.
Tax. Yeah, people are jittery because of the lack of information.
Which
is quite sad because
shrouded in a lot of secrecy and
a
big accountability question.
Secrecy. There is misinformation.
Okay.
People are very ignorant about many of the things they talk about. And that's why we have said that the government needs to continue to inform the people. And we as the media, we do not have an obligation to promote misinformation.
That's it.
And that's why we already have the document which Oyedele brought here.
Yes.
And then, of course, we just urge that nobody likes the taxman.
Yes.
But there should be transparency. There should be clarity.
Okay, on that note...
Secrecy. Because as of today,
no, guys, this is not the
you don't
topic
know what's
for
in the
today.
harmonized
I
document,
appreciate this.
and you don't know what's in the gazetted document.
But it's actually
Secrecy.
time for the world brief.
Word.
I appreciate the passion because this is a very big deal.
Secrecy.
I get it. But maybe the New Year's resolution for Taiwo Oyedele for 2026 will be to keep on talking and keep on informing. Maybe that's the New Year's resolution we can give them. But now we're going to go around the world and take a look at what has been happening all around in our world brief. Now, more than 3 decades after unilaterally declaring independence from Somalia, Somaliland on Friday received its first recognition from a UN member state, Israel. Now, in a statement by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he described the declaration as being in the spirit of the Abraham Records at the initiative of Donald Trump. Now, several countries and regional blocs, including the African Union, the State of Palestine, and Qatar, have condemned Israel's recognition of Somaliland as an independent nation, citing both international law and the UN Charter. Now, in the case of the AU, a key doctrine declares that African states should not redraw colonial-era borders. That's a conversation to be had because some people are saying, well, the AU has recognized Eritrea and South Sudan. Well, whichever way, Somalia called Israel's announcement a deliberate attack on its sovereignty that undermines efforts for regional peace. Now, while celebrations in favor of this development erupted in the Somaliland capital of Hargeisa, protests against the development began in the Awdal state of Somaliland, and people came out in their numbers carrying Palestinian flags. In Mogadishu, Somalia's capital, protesters were seen burning the Somaliland flag. Amidst all this, what is the significance of Israel's position? Well, let's take a look at it in detail. Now, we're going to go to our map, where most analysts have zeroed in on the Bab el Mandeb Strait. Now, this is a critical choke point that handles up to 12% of the world of world trade. That's right here. You see, it goes from the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden. Now, the strait connects the European Mediterranean trade with Asian markets via the Suez Canal, and this makes it vital for energy and container shipping. Somaliland's coastline on the Gulf of Aden near the strait provides strategic maritime access, with its port of Berbera being key. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Recent attacks by Iran-backed Houthi forces from Yemen, you see this is just across the water, have disrupted supply chains. Of course, we know that Israel and Yemen, by proxy, under Iran, have not been getting along at all. Israel's recognition of Somaliland may aim to secure these routes and counter Houthi threats. The Horn of Africa has become an increasingly tense battlefield for Gulf rivalries and other global proxies, because we know that the US is also stationed here in Djibouti with a military base, and there's also a Japanese military base and a Chinese military base there. There's Turkish influence down here in Somalia, and we also have UAE influence in Somaliland. We know that UAE is also here off the map in Sudan and South Sudan. So Gulf states are increasingly getting involved in this region. Somalia has been been contending with aggression from various terrorist groups such as Al-Shabaab and Islamic State for decades. Now, many thought there may have been a glimmer of hope after the nation's capital, Mogadishu, held its first direct vote in 5 decades just last week. But the latest move by Israel risks slipping the Horn of Africa deeper into a proxy-fueled crisis, as we already know that Yemen has responded, and they've said that Somaliland is now fair game. They said that it is now a target for any military attacks that might happen from the Houthis based on Israel's recognition of this nation. So the question is, are we now going to see Houthis attacking Somaliland because of this declaration? Well, let's move on to other news where unfortunately we continue to discuss wars around the world. Now, President Trump met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy at Mar-a-Lago on Sunday as negotiations on ending Russia's war in the Eastern European nation continue. Now, upon greeting Zelenskyy at the entrance to the club, Trump projected optimism, telling reporters that the sides have the makings of a deal to end the war. After their meeting, Zelenskyy and Trump announced at a joint press briefing that progress was made on a 20-point peace proposal backed by the Ukrainian leader. But of course, both have noted that more work is needed to end the conflict. Now, some of the key highlights of a pathway to peace include, of course, security guarantees as previously stated, an $800 billion infrastructure redevelopment fund. But issues around territory, of course, remain the biggest niggling issue.
Russia's going to be helping. Russia wants to see Ukraine succeed. Once, it sounds a little strange, but I was explaining to the president, President Putin was very generous in his feeling toward Ukraine succeeding, including supplying energy, electricity, and other things at very low prices. So a lot of good things came out of that call today. But they were in the works for 2 weeks with Steve and with Jared and Marco and everybody.
Did Russia agree, or did Putin agree to a ceasefire to allow a referendum to take place?
Not a ceasefire, and that's one of the points that we're working on right now. No, not a ceasefire. He feels that, look, you know, they're fighting and to stop, and then if they have to start again, which is a possibility, he doesn't want to be in that position. I understand that position.
So it's a lot of mixed messaging, because one moment we're optimistic, one moment we say Russia wants the best, but we're also saying Russia doesn't want a ceasefire. So it's very confusing messaging from that meeting. Now let's move over to elections over the weekend here on the African continent, as Guinea voted on Sunday in a presidential election widely expected to hand Mamadi Doumbouya, who seized power in a 2021 coup, a 7-year mandate, completing the West African nation's transition back to civilian rule. Well, the former Special Forces commander, aged 41, faced 8 other candidates in the election as ousted President Alpha Condé and longtime opposition leader Cellou Dalein Diallo remain in exile. The opposition called for a boycott of the vote as civil society groups accuse his government of banning protests, curbing press freedom, and restricting opposition activity. Now, in September, Guinea approved a new constitution in a referendum, which the opposition called on voters to boycott. The document, in essence, allowed military leaders to stand for election, and this then paved the way for Doumbouya's candidacy. It also lengthened presidential terms from 5 to 7 years, renewable once. Now, in nearby Central African Republic, mathematician and former university vice-chancellor, President Faustin Archange Touadéra, who got involved in politics under the coup leader François Bozizé, remains the front-runner for the presidency. Now, after being elected head of state as a post-conflict and consensual civil society figure, he eventually bulldozed his way to a constitutional amendment to scrap term limits, affording him this opportunity to go for a 3rd term. Results from both elections are expected within the next 48 hours. So those are developments coming from Guinea and Central African Republic as we continue to advocate for the deepening of democracy on the African continent. Some of the elections taking place are not encouraging. Now, before we get into analysis of what's happening around the world, let's take a look at some of our newspaper headlines. Here at home, of course, we always begin with This Day newspaper. This day leads with a message of assurance from Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Wale Edo, afternoon. Of course, this has already been dissected in detail by my colleagues here on the morning show. Now, of course, the message is to investors, analysts, and multilateral partners following the strike action by the U.S. in Sokoto. And this was put out in a statement titled Statement on Recent Security Operations and Market Implications as the markets open today following the Christmas break. Of course, we know that there's going to be a lot of public relations work and communication work that's going to need to be done following this U.S. airstrike to correct or to try and manage Nigeria's image to the world because the reportage out there is not favorable to Nigeria and to those who are interested in traveling to Nigeria or doing business in Nigeria. Also on this day, just below the masthead, politics as Tinubu closes 2027 deal with Kano Governor Abba Yusuf, concluding plan to join ruling APC. Now, of course, this would push APC governors nationwide to a grand total of 28, should it happen. But of course, the major questions that remain are what would happen to the major stakeholders in Kano, Abdullahi Ganduje for one, and Rabiu Kwankwanso. Where would this type of deal leave them? And this is a conversation we're also having in the road to 2027 as we ask ourselves, those people who might feel left out once the primaries are concluded, are they going to form part of a formidable opposition? Now to the Daily Trust. Daily Trust is leading with security. But before we get to security, reports that fuel prices are down, as we know, thanks to Dangote, yet transport fares are still up. Very curious paradox currently going on as people start to consider their journeys home after the vacation. However, the main story, of course, is concerning the U.S. airstrikes, reporting that casualties are likely in Sokoto. This is something that's already been discussed in detail this morning. And this follows news, of course, that emerged about missed targets and undetonated warheads. But amidst all of that, it does seem clear that this isn't the dominant narrative. There were targets that were hit. There were casualties, albeit one or two may have missed the mark. Now let's go to Vanguard newspaper, which also looks at security in detail. Here they call it the anatomy of an attack. And they talk about how U.S. warship launched over a dozen Tomahawks against Lakurawa terrorists. Now, this report, which goes into deep detail from a different angle, it talks about how the U.S. warship launched over a dozen Tomahawks against the terrorists, and the report goes into the details of the estimated cost that Dr. Bati spoke about this morning. One Tomahawk goes for between $1 million and $5 million, depending on the load that it's carrying. So this is by no means a small, nor is it a cheap operation that we're seeing underway in Nigeria. But I think there would be questions from all observers as to how we are going to repay this great debt that we shall owe. They say there's no such thing as a free lunch in politics. Now let's go to the New Telegraph newspaper. The New Telegraph gives us a roundup of how Rivers State Emergency Rule, ADC, defections shaped 2025 as a year of political upheavals. The paper also reports on President Tinubu's celebration of the Eyo Festival, that's right here, and of course he celebrated it for its culture, tradition, that holds tourism potential. This was just before he departed for Europe to continue his end-of-year break before starting another trip to the Gulf, which would take place mid-January, I believe. Now to The Guardian, as we round up with Nigerian newspapers, The Guardian reports that Peter Obi, over here, has declared that his lawmakers and Obedience are set to join ADC officially on December 31st, as he also confirmed his intent to run for the presidency in 2027. Things are getting interesting. Let's just take one international paper, which will be the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail in the UK leads with this bold quote from Kemi Badenoch, who says, "I don't want people who hate our country coming here." Now, of course, this is as the Tory leaders fury as Starmer welcomes freed anti-Semitic Egyptian dissident who has called for the killing of British police. But I know a lot of people are saying, "Oh, we're back in the news for our passion about the United Kingdom," for Kemi Badenoch. But those are some of the stories leading conversations today at home and all around the world. I heed the floor for for your comments.
All right, great job as always. As regards As regards Somaliland, Israel is looking for routes, trading routes and access routes. Pure and simple. Bab el-Mandab. That's it. When you look at up there, you see the Yemenis out there trying to fight for that same route. Israel thinks recognizing Somaliland is the very first step. A couple of other nations have said no to that. We're not in support of that. I don't want to bore you with the historical antecedents of Italian Somaliland and British Somaliland.
But it's important, actually.
You get?
Yeah.
I mean, so it goes back to colonial days and all of that goes back and forth. So what will be the case now? What will happen as a result of this? Yes, you're going to see a couple of reprisals. Houthi rebels probably will make 1 or 2 strikes and everything. But largely, Somaliland will get away with it because America will come in the mix, will also support Israel. And they will gain a very strong footing there over time. And they will gain access to that route. And that's what's going to happen in the end. Secondly, as regards Zelenskyy and Putin, Putin wants land, wants to take Donbass, wants to take Donetsk, wants to take some other parts of Russia, of Ukraine. It's a hard sell because the Ukrainian constitution says very strongly we shouldn't concede land. Zelenskyy will not want to be the leader that wants to concede land. What I think will be the result of all of this, they're going to go through a rigmarole. This is going to tarry into probably first or second quarter next year. Putin is going to intensify the bombings. The best bet will be for Europe to be able to buffer and support Ukraine so Ukraine can have, to be able to retaliate and fight back and hold the fort. The question is, I don't know how long they're going to be able to hold it for. But this deal by Trump will hardly work. I mean, it's dead on arrival. It's just like the peace deal he got in Gaza, where the killings are still going on in Gaza. It's just that the world media is not reporting it as much as possible.
Yeah. Or maybe Zelenskyy will get some tomahawks. Maybe the anointing of Nigeria will fall on Zelenskyy.
I doubt if Trump will be willing to give. I doubt.
On security guarantees, he actually didn't commit fully because he said there were 95% there. So he doesn't have that security guarantee as Zelenskyy would have liked. However, that was a 2.5-hour meeting, said to be the longest meeting that both have had. They came out looking quite positive, as if things were good. I mean, look at the picture behind you, both of them shaking, hands shaking, smiling, and you would notice that following the infamous interaction they had in the early, with that meeting, it seems like relationships have improved and Zelenskyy has been able to see how he can diplomatically deal with Trump. But some key things out of this. It was said that before this meeting, Trump had a phone conversation with Putin himself. And that's where that statement where he said, he wants the best interest for Ukraine came out from when the reporter asked him the question. However, that best interest for Ukraine does not include a ceasefire to allow Ukraine to have a referendum. So that is, it's ironic. Or it's two different statements there. Not a lot came out of this. Nice optics, good statements, good body language, but the key issues have not been dealt with, and that is what is said to be stalling this peace deal that's supposed to happen between Ukraine and Russia, which is Ukraine ceding territory to Russia, which they have been adamant that it would not happen. Russia doubling down, saying they would not accept a peace deal if this doesn't happen. Europe's play in this as well in terms of supporting and backing and also putting some kind of pressure on Trump himself to give a security deal with arms, boots on ground, ammunition as well provided to Ukraine. That hasn't happened. So good news, good optics with regards to what has come out. But in terms of the, substance, not a lot of it has happened. So let's see how that war or conflict that Trump is seeing to end as part of his campaign promises will happen. Not anything yet to say who yet.
Okay, very quickly. On Christmas Day, President Zelenskyy spoke with Steve Witkoff and our son-in-law, who had been involved in the negotiations. And he sent Christmas greetings to President Trump. And he said, it was a very healthy conversation. Good news is coming. And then, I think yesterday, he now spoke with President Trump. In fact, he was invited to Mar-a-Lago in Florida. And at that Florida meeting, an hour before it, President Trump has spoken to President Putin of Russia. And then, they now came up with this story that, there is hope in the horizon. So that's the setting of this latest development in terms of the negotiations. However, it is not clear that progress has been made as President Trump is trying to make out. Why is progress not being made? Because two issues. Now the area, Luhansk and Donetsk, 75% of Donetsk taken over by Russia, 99% of Luhansk taken over together. The whole region is known as the Eastern Donbass. And then, of course, 22% of the entire Ukrainian territory is in the hands of Russia. Now, President Zelenskyy, he says he cannot cede land. President Trump says, well, you cede this land a little bit. He says no. He does not have the powers under Article 2, Article 73, and Article 13 of the Ukrainian Constitution. That is only the people who can cede their land. Now, what Ukraine is proposing is a demilitarized zone that will be under the control of Ukraine. And Russia says no. The other issue is about the security guarantees. The coalition of the willing, the European countries they say that, look, the Ukraine will have the kind of guarantee under Article 5 of the NATO constitution. Those are the two big issues. And then reconciliation of the 28-point plan by the United States and the reduction to 20 by the European allies. So I don't think there is as much progress as President Trump is trying to make out. And it is as follows. To the extent that, look, Russia is not giving any commitment. And that's why Zelenskyy has said Russia doesn't seem to be committed to this. But there will be more meetings. Whether Russia will agree to the demilitarized zone or not is what we will see eventually. As for Somaliland, the issue is simply this. Israel recognizing Somaliland as President Mohamud of Somalia pointed out, is likely to increase tensions in that Horn of Africa. That's number one. Number two, what Israel is looking for, basically, is access through the Gulf of Aden to be able to attack Houthi rebels in Yemen because it's a shorter route. But he has couched it as Abrahamic Accords and U.S. involvement. This thing is all about geopolitics. It's all about, U.S. and Israel working together to seize more territory. And it is just appropriate that the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the Six Gulf Nation Council of Cooperation, the AU, and other countries have condemned it. Because under the United Nations Protocol, secession is not allowed. Under the African Union Protocol, secession is not encouraged. So you do not just say you are succeeding, although it's a more complex history from 1960 to 1965 to 1991. That is the issue we have.